Dr. Jazz.
For taking the time.
Hey, it's so good to see you.
You too. You too. It's been a while. You haven't been
Yeah.
around, so.
Yeah,
But you've been busy, so.
everything's been different the past few years.
Yeah, after COVID, it's changed a lot. I mean, the whole touring circuit, it's just like become, I don't know what's become of it. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
I
bizarre.
don't know either because I'm not out there.
Yeah.
But you know, I love living here and building community here. I love what you're doing with this. This is amazing.
Yeah, it's become an obsession a bit. So it's
Yeah.
gotten out of control almost, but yeah, no, it's okay. It's cool.
You're in like over 400 of these, right?
Yeah, it's like 4 hours is 446. So
What do you get? What do you get out of it? What like why do you keep doing it?
I don't know, you know, it relaxes me, you know, after a day of teaching or spending, you know, we have a 1-year-old, so it's quite, then I usually, you know, take a beer and talk to some of my favorite musicians, and it's like, I don't know, I love hearing these stories. I always did, you know, like no matter who it is, whether it's Bob Moses or it's you or it's someone younger or just, you know, the whole shtick of how they compose, how they got into the scene, and I don't know. I think that's what jazz is all about, right? Almost.
Totally. That's such a huge part of it. The stories and the community and like sharing experiences with each other.
Yeah.
You're so smart to do it this way. Like, you know, I think so much of the history of music is about like building communities and coming out of community. And we've lost so much of that, but you're recreating it through these. I love that you're doing that. And I love that you just mentioned Bob Moses because that Pure and Simple album is so beautiful and
you
cool.
listen to it.
And it's so nice to hear him and what he's doing now. Yeah. So I was really psyched that to be able to hear, you know, when was that recorded? Like early 2000s or something?
No, that's like 2 years ago.
I mean, early 20s is what I meant. Sorry, 2021 or something.
22, I think. 22 it was. Yeah, 22.
That makes sense. Obviously, COVID and all. That's so cool to know that like we get to hear what the great Bob Moses is up to and thinking and playing. You know, I love it.
Yeah, it's amazing, these guys. Like, it's just the stories of these guys. You know, when we were on the road with Arilt and Bob, and Arilt was like, yeah, you know, when I played with Sonny in '68, and they're like a small kid sipping my wine, like, and then Bob is like, yeah, you know, but then there was that evening with Mingus and Dolphy when I sat in. I was like, what? You know?
Yeah, unbelievable.
We weren't even born yet, and these guys were like playing with the giants, you know, and yeah, and I don't know, these interviews for me are like, you know, I wish there existed stuff like that, you know, with musicians from the 60s and 70s. Like, I would love to watch an Andrew Hill interview, or I don't know, Booker Little or whoever, like, you know, and maybe it's like,
oh my God, yeah,
you know, imagine like 30 years from now or 40, it's like a database for people to maybe see what musicians were doing.
I know, right? And these musicians like Art Taylor, who did interview their colleague, and William Parker, who's been doing this. The work is amazing.
Yeah.
I really appreciate those folks. Yeah.
I mean,
and you.
Well, thanks for everyone who's, you know, always really responsive and would love to do that as well. So it's,
I know.
You know, usually we're in our own thing and don't get to talk many times about what we do. So I think that's nice that people hear, and there's so many band leaders, you know, that's scary for me. When I look at my record collection, it's just like all of you guys out there, you know, it's like, it's so many band leaders and incredible music that's out there, and it's man, it's scary. So good music, you know, such good music.
Yeah, this is a real interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting. This, you know, just how much supply, to put it in like, you know, coarse, crass market terminology. Like how big the supply is and like what that means, you know, for like how do you create a sustainable sort of economic community and model for how to do this work. And, you know, it's interesting, presents some challenges. I think the whole AI accessibility is going to like even push that thing further to the brink, and we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what comes out of it.
Yeah, definitely. But Matt, I'll just jump in, you know, I wanted to ask you about I'll touch later the Return Trip and the Playball Trio. I love that band, and ask you if it's still happening. But first, I would like to begin with Audible Spirits.
Oh, cool! Yeah,
and I love what you did. It sounds so amazing. And how come you decided to do that? And what's the story behind it, actually?
Okay, we're gonna go deep. Let's see. There was a Claudia Quintet tour a long time ago. I'm not gonna get the year. We played in the Armitage, I think it's called, in Paris, and an amazing group played before us, and I'm not going to remember their name right now, but they brought a couch onto stage, and they had people like sitting on stage with them, and there was something about that gesture. The music was beautiful, but it wasn't an oral experience for me. There was something about that gesture of like incorporating this sort of 1950s sensibility on this couch. They had a very like 1950s looking couch, and they had some people, mostly women, dressed in that and like 50s clothing, and they're sitting down on the couch listening to, and it really got me thinking about artifice and jazz, kind of, and like the creation of theater and different ways to like address this relationship of the artist, the performer, and the audience. And so I've always sort of held on to that feeling and that idea. And over the years, I was like, what is there for me? You know, like what was interesting about that? And so I started thinking about my relationship to the jazz tradition and to like the sort of 1950s style jazz that sort of got codified into jazz education. And I started thinking about my desire to play standards, but that I had to do it from a place that felt authentic to me somehow, you know. So all these things sort of came together into a point where I was like, I would love to be able to play standards, but to improvise the whole band at the same time, to sort of artificially like engage the listener in this sort of like, what if the whole thing changes at the same time in a way that you can't do if you have actual individuals, right? So I thought, who could do this with me? And you know, I have a lot of long-term relationships in music, and one of them is with Curtis Hasselbring, who's a wonderful trombone player and composer and electronic musician. So I went to Curtis and I was like, hey, what do you think about this idea of manipulating Jamie Aebersold play-along recordings as we play standards, and to sort of create some sort of like cool, like there's like a coolness to like, I guess that's a connection between what I was thinking of this sort of 1950s aesthetic, right? To sort of like both invoke and undermine that sort of 1950s cool jazz standards sort of thing. So we started working with a singer. We first tried the concept with a singer, and oh my God, I'm going to remember this name instead of feeling uncomfortable and put on the spot and blanking on her name. Margaret Grebowitz started it with us, and we checked it out. And I had met her playing with John O'Gallagher on the Webern project, which was super cool.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So we checked it out, and we were like, ooh, there's something here. This is interesting, right? And then Margaret moved away, and life moved on, and I started co-leading the education program at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, a maximum security New York State prison.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a place I'd had a relationship with a long time. the music program there through Carnegie Hall, and some of the guys there had asked me to come back and teach. So I started co-leading there with a woman named Sarah Elizabeth Charles, who has since become like a real close musical partner. So as soon as I started working with Sarah and got to know her, and we established this sort of we could tell that we think about music in a lot of the same ways in terms of what the purpose is. And she's such an amazing singer. I was like, this is a person who might actually want to do this with me. And the idea had sort of grown for me. You know, I was thinking about it in terms of jazz education at this point, how to subvert that stuff, and thinking about role of white supremacy in jazz education and institutionalization, and who is creating systems and benefiting from them and stuff. And Sarah is always basically like a step ahead of me on talking and thinking about that stuff. And so I was like, okay, cool. Let's get together with Curtis. I explained the idea to Sarah, and she was like, huh, it sounds really weird. I was like, yeah, let's check it out. And she was totally game. She heard the potential in it, and we just started working on it, and we workshopped it. Up until COVID, we put in like, I don't know, probably a solid year and a half of getting together regularly and like really thinking, what could this be? And I really wanted it to be a theater piece, actually. And Sarah was down with this, and Curtis was a little uncomfortable with this. I'm telling all the stories now. And so we developed.
Listen to this, so.
Have you talked to Curtis ever?
Yeah. He's. I'll send you a link. We've been through everything, so.
Cool. So, yeah, we developed it and we performed it for folks, like an invited group of people, and we had monologues and all these lighting cues, and we really did it as like a theater piece, but playing almost all the standards you hear on the record, and talking about our relationship to these records. And so then COVID hit, everything shut down, no one did anything. And eventually I came back to them. I was like, we put so much work into this. It's such a cool concept. Like, can we just document it? And so everyone was like, yeah, we totally should do that. So we went into the studio and we recorded it as a record, but we had to sort of rework it to make it not a theater piece, you know, like what is it as just a standalone record of tracks. So that's what we did, and we made it. And we got so fired up with the process of like recording it that we're like, we should keep doing this. It's got to keep being a band. And so people have reached out. Some folks want to book us. We're got a rehearsal. We got some new music coming. Gonna start working on Prelude to a Kiss. And
oh wow, okay.
So yeah, so the wheels. It's a big wheel, and it turns very slowly, but it's definitely turning. And yeah, it's just a really exciting opportunity for me to think about what standards mean for me, to hear standards in a new way. I'm really into a lot of the polytonality that comes out of that group, where you get the same form moving, but at different points in the form. So there are like all these different ways you can hear it. I really like how the metaverse is getting invoked through jazz standards with this stuff.
Oh, I love it, man. It's like when I saw Moment's Notice, Girl from Ipanema, I was like, shit, really? They're gonna play standards, or? And then I hear Girl from Ipanema. I was like, whoa, like with those kind of, it's like a DJ switch, with the all the glitches from the backing tracks. I mean, Jamie's stuff, and it's so cool. It's so fresh because otherwise the standard, it's like, okay, you can play it. There's not much you can do to Girl from Ipanema. I mean, reharmonize it. It's not worth it. Odd meter, but you did like,
yeah, it's great.
Yeah, beautiful stuff.
I mean, you can also just play it, and that's okay too.
That's okay. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But it's hard for us. It's hard to find an appropriate emotional context to just play Girl from Ipanema with people.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
That time has passed. You got to figure out what speaks to you now and what speaks to other people now.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything you hear on that record that's not voice or vibraphone or guitar is coming right from those records. And Curtis is, either just playing it or processing it or gating it or manipulating it in some way, which is so cool.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, the Girl from Ipanema is an interesting one because we switch between different Jamie Aebersold versions of it, right? So all of a sudden, you know, Curtis is playing along to a guitar and bass, I think, and then all of a sudden it's piano and drum set.
It's so cool.
When I'm playing, and we're trading. I think we trade fours on that, and the rhythm section keeps changing. It's like really hilarious. But you know, the weird thing is, we just did what they call a convocation at a university in Long Island. We were talking about the work and performing the pieces, and young people, a lot of young, even students of jazz, like they don't really use Jamie Aebersold play-alongs anymore, and they don't really have a relationship to him. So, but they're very comfortable with borrowed sound and tracks and loops, right? That's like the air they breathe. So the part of it that's supposed to feel a little like heretical, you know, like it should feel, to me, feels really terrifying and wrong, which is what makes it risky and exciting to do. Yeah. To them, that's like, oh, whatever, that's cool. Okay, so that's, you know, that's the track you're using. I'm like, wait. You know that this is like deeply messed up and wrong, right? They're like, oh, you know, okay. I hear that that's your truth, you know. I'm like, come on. This is jazz we're talking about. You're not supposed to be using tracks. So
yeah, it's also your relationship. And let's say our generation is different because we probably practiced on those backing tracks, right? So, and they didn't, I guess.
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about community. Like where I grew up, there was no community of jazz learners to hang with, to play with. Like I didn't have folks to try and develop the music with. So yeah, playing along with records, whether it was actual records or like play along records, that was it. That was what I had. That was everything. And that's a weird reality, you know.
Yeah. What was the age when you said like you want to do jazz actually? And why this instrument that you're stuck with? I mean, like
right. I know. Well, I'll tell you what happened. It is it's not really a good story. It's not to my credit, but I was playing classical percussion. And I remember I was probably like 14 or 15, and in some summer, you know, youth, probably a wind ensemble program or something like that. And you know, there are like 4 percussionists or something, and they look at the percussionists and they're like, all right, which of these kids can we have play timpani? You know, which requires a slightly different skill because you got to tune the drums and stuff. And I guess looking at this group of kids, they're like, all right, that's the kid that's going to be able to do it, that has the best chance of like succeeding out of these kids, right? So they put me on timpani. Just not something I'm really used to, and I'm trying to do it and keep messing up this one section. And conductor got really frustrated and called me out in front of everyone. And I was like, you know what? That's it, man. This is not how I see my life going. Like living in fear of a conductor and getting called out for mistakes of music like I didn't write, you know. Like I don't think this is for me. So I think it was really right after that summer, probably when I was, I don't know, 15, that I was like, all right, I'm putting all my eggs into the jazz basket. At that same time, I had heard I had been in a car with a high school friend who was older than me, who was listening to a Love Supreme. And I was like, wait, what is this? And that same guy also like pulled me out of English class once. He's like, yeah, there's a little Walkman, a little cassette, you know. He's like, man, put these ear things on, the kind with the metal goes over. And I was listening, and I was like, this is fire. Like, what is this? And he's like, yeah, it's this guy named Eric Delphi, and this is an album, Out to Lunch. And so like that stuff happened at about the same time that I was like, I'm too scared of conductors. I can't do this. So I was like, that's when I just made the switch. I was like, I'm gonna try and learn to play the vibraphone.
Wow.
And so then I left all that percussion stuff behind until like, I don't know, maybe 24, 25, when I re-entered the world of percussion, you know, as opposed to vibraphone. from the Balkan perspective, and I fell in love with the tapan,
yeah, sure. Yeah,
through Bulgarian, and so now drumming is back in my life, but in a really different. I keep it really in that box of like this one drum that you wear and you play with very certain techniques, and
yeah.
And that's kind of fun for me. It keeps me in that, like, the double mind, like when you double on an instrument, it's not your main thing. I think there's a lot of like freedom you get from that, from not being wholly invested, like this is everything, this represents everything about me, and I like that freedom because I'm so self-critical and self-hating anyway. It's nice to have a little out.
Interesting. Where does this, you mentioned the tapan, and I know this Slavic Soul Party, but where does this love for Balkan, Macedonian, Bulgarian, I mean, odd meters come from you? What was why did you decide to form that band, actually, which I think is still going, right? And
and
this
we've
love for
been
this
playing
music, I mean,
we've been playing for over 20 years every Tuesday night, coming up on 21 years, and the band's been together longer than that. So yeah, we're going, making albums, writing new music, growing. It's cool. Band, I don't know how it happens, but the band continues to sound better and better. So yeah, how did that happen? I feel like my time with Joe Maneri was a really important linchpin in that sort of, in those intersections there. Of course, I had heard like a little bit of Bulgarian vocal music before working with Joe, but it was, I was a student at Berkeley, actually, Berkeley College of Music, and I was studying composition. I remember listening to the Bulgarian women's choir and being like, what is going on here? They're using like so many fewer ideas, like compared to all this compositional stuff I'm checking out, but there's an emotional power here that's like way beyond a lot of the stuff I'm like checking out too. I'm like, how do you get so much power out of such limited materials, limited range, limited, orchestration, whatever you want to call it? But like, so that became super fascinating to me, how to get more out of less. And then I was working with Joe Maneri, and Joe Maneri, I don't know if you know, or for other folks, it was an amazing musician, a woodwind player and a pianist and a composer and a microtonal innovator. And he grew up in New York City, and he played jazz, and he played Greek music and Irish music and all sorts of stuff. And so as an improviser, he had created this huge universe and language. And he, I think his time with Greek music had like helped form some of what this was for him, as well as the Second Viennese School and microtonal music and all this other stuff. But he talked about snake time, like a different rhythmic feeling. And then as I was improvising with him and talking about stuff like this with him, and ultimately performing with him and Matt Maneri, his son, I like discovered some of the more southern Balkan stuff, like from southern Macedonia, from southwestern Bulgaria, from northern Greece, the area that's in Greece they call Macedonia. And there's just some really fascinating rhythmic stuff in there that kind of works in that snake time way, but turns out to be like, maybe what's the word for this, like physiokinetic base. It's about like the timing of the music is based on the motions of people's bodies doing the dance. So it doesn't even have to be odd meters. It's not really about that. It's about a different relationship to phrase and time that comes from people's bodies, right? And this is interesting, as we talking about the origins of Audible Spirits, and now I'm thinking about what I'm telling you in a different way, thinking like about that relationship between the people who are maybe perceiving or experiencing the music and the musicians, that there's that back and forth there with the Balkan music that I love, especially as a drummer. You're really not in control, but you're really in the river of the music in that way. You're not like sitting on the bank throwing something in. You're like in there shaping the currents with people.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting thing for me. So that's how I got really drawn into the Balkan drumming thing. And then, of course, I just got hooked, and I went deep into these workshops in the U.S. that happened, and started working with immigrant musicians. Started traveling to the Balkans, and
Oh, you did? Okay.
oh yeah, many times.
Oh, really?
And so then I grew to appreciate the tradition on its own, and wanted to be, you know, I don't know, a valid practitioner of the various traditions over there too. So I try and learn how to, and I'm going to go play Northern Greek music tonight in a very traditional way.
Oh, wow.
I still play in traditional context, but I like to, that's why I have my own band, Slavic Soul Party, so that I could, mess around inappropriately on my own time and not mess with other people's stuff.
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh, wow. Yeah. It's like, it's interesting because what you're doing is different than like, Matt Dario did or Pachora did with Brad Chapik, and you're kind of going a different path with the Slavic Soul Party. So it's quite cool to see the New York vibe, of Balkan music in New York. What you guys have been doing. I mean, not you, but also you.
Right.
Including you.
I know. I always wonder what that stuff looks like from Eastern Europe.
It's amazing because you're jazz guys. I mean, jazz guys. You are improvisers, and then you encounter this Balkan music and you fall in love with it, and you start messing with it, and it's like, damn, I love this.
Right.
It's so cool.
It's so it's so great to hear different people's personalities come out and integrate things in different ways, yeah. Right? I mean, Matt Dario and Pachora and Brad and Chris Speed and Jim Black and Squares Ferris, all these guys were so important to me, and to hear what they were doing was just so mind-blowing. And yet I knew that it wasn't what I wanted to do with it. It's so interesting to, like, when you perceive those differences, like, they're my heroes to this day, and some of them are also my friends, which is wonderful too. But I guess to have that knowledge of the dance experience was something I had that was different than what they had, because I started to deepen my knowledge, not through just listening to recordings, but through actually going and being in a folk dance context and learning the dances, and learning about the relationship in a traditional context between the musicians and the dancers. And I became very much concerned or interested in those interactions and those relationships and how that changes the music. Yeah. So yeah, my stuff still involves a lot of improvisation, but yeah, it goes in a different direction than that stuff did.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, it's really nice to hear that. I like that. Yeah. Matt, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Joe Maneri, and you've been on the New York scene now for 30 years, I guess.
29, yeah.
29. Yeah. Like, how was it for you in the beginning when you came to New York? And I mean, I checked some of my CDs that I have at home, and like the earliest which I have is Vanishing Point by Ellery Askelin and one by Hollenbeck, I think Claudia Quintet, which is like also 2001. But were these two guys the first two kind of that you connected, or like how was the initial start for you?
So I went to Berklee College of Music, and I did a master's at New England Conservatory, and that was a 2-year thing. And then I came immediately a day or two after graduating, came to New York. I had a how did that work? I'd had a teacher at New England Conservatory, the pianist Paul Bley, who had just started teaching. So we didn't know what Paul was going to be like as a teacher at that point, and that's a whole nother story. I
bet you could write a book.
Drinking wine.
Yeah, it's more like that. Yeah, Paul Bley stories.
But he had connected me with someone he knew, I guess someone who had been a student of his. So I landed in New York, subletting this guy's apartment. And also, right before I left NEC, a few months before I left NEC, William Parker had been an artist in residence. And so I had spent a lot of time for 3 days or so, or it's been, for me, it felt like a lot of time around William. It was super important. And he was very encouraging. And he's like, hey, like, what are you doing after school? I said, well, I want to come to New York. He's like, well, call me when you get here.
Oh, really? Wow.
So this is just another of many, 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 many data points that will like help people who don't know William understand what a kind and cool and amazing person he is. I was a young, freaked out kid in New York City. And I got there, I'm like, what am I gonna? I was like, I only have like one angle here. It's William Parker. So I probably called that man every 3 minutes for like months. So eventually he called me back, and so I started doing some gigs with him in the Little Huey Creative Music Orchestra that summer, and also, so I came to New York on Memorial Day of 2005, I guess. So end of May, and in June and July, I think in July, I started playing gigs with William, and in June, I think I got a gig. I don't know when it was, sometime in summer. I got a gig in Europe. Doing something that wasn't entirely clear to me what it was, but that I would be playing the vibraphone part for a Gunther Schuller piece that he'd written for the Modern Jazz Quartet with orchestra.
Wow.
So, it was this weird situation where like no one was really paying attention to who I was or how I was getting there, or like, it was before all the electronic communication was super easy. So I just had a town I had to be in and a date that I had to be there, and I bought my own ticket and I got myself there, and there was one hotel, and I was like, hey, do you have a room for me? And they're like, I don't think so. I was like,
Oh,
with the festival, they're like, okay, we'll put you up and we'll figure it out. And they finally got it. Turns out I was in the right place at the right time. And the drummer, so it turned out to be like a youth orchestra sort of thing, or a young professional. I don't know exactly what it was, but the people who were playing the modern jazz quartet parts were me and a drummer who turned out to be from New York, whose name I learned was John Hollenbeck, and a bass player who now is in the Hamburg band, the radio band there, and named Ingrid. And so we did the rehearsal and we did the gig, but they asked me like right before, hey, would you also, like the day before, they're like, how about you do like a solo set at this festival tomorrow too? And I was like, how about I do a duo gig with that drummer? He seems interesting. So I went and talked to him, and that was John Hollenbeck. That's how I met John. And it turns out we lived like, a handful of blocks from each other in Brooklyn. And so that summer, those first few months in New York, like I made my connection to John, I made my connection to William. I recorded a trio CD at Power Station that I hired Andrew D'Angelo to produce with us. And so that was like sort of the beginning of my world in New York, and it's getting set up there, those relationships. And so, so the sort of downtown improvising scene, the so-called, what kind of became like the Brooklyn improviser music scene, that all sort of came into place. And I was living and hanging out with folks like Jamie Saft and Kung Fu and John met him, and you know, a bunch of other musicians. Of course, we all were bouncing around houses and trading rooms and stuff. But and Curtis Hasselbring was in a house that I was hanging out at a lot, and Oscar Noriega and Jim Black and Chris Speed and Andrew D'Angelo, and that was sort of like the center of my Brooklyn experience at that point.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When did you start playing with Claudia Quintet? Actually, when did John invite you?
Well, it was developed sort of out of these relationships. He was like, we connected, and he was like, I'm working on a new project. I think you'd be good for this. He introduced me to Ted Reichman, an accordion player who he had started playing with also. And we really connected and became friends. And so we were hanging out, and I was like, man, if you're going to use someone who plays clarinet and tenor, I really, really, really think it should be Chris Speed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like, okay, I'll check that out. And then, you know, eventually we did some rehearsals, and Drew was available, and John always knew he wanted Drew there because that's such a special relationship. And so, and then that was a Claudia Quintet. And then, so that probably was, when was that? 96 or so.
Already, yeah.
And then we were off and stumbling, you know, and trying to get gigs and make a career and understand music together. And I miss that group. We haven't played in a few years now.
Yeah, he's in Canada now, John, right? So it's harder.
Yeah, well, I mean, John's always busy and always living somewhere. That's not usually where I am. So we have been able to jump those hurdles before, but you know, there's always something different in life. And
I hope he brings it back to life. John, if you're watching this, we need Claudia Quintet, new material.
And I think it was in the Claudia Quintet van that I first started hearing your name, because you did some stuff with John, right? And Chris.
Yeah, and Julian Arguelles, and that was fun, man. John is just, man, I love his playing. He's such a nice guy. I remember we were on tour, and everywhere we drove, you know, he had like a map of veggie places all over Europe. We're like, I don't know, in Leipzig, and he's like, yeah, I don't know. It's like the Grüne something, you know, like just go there. Like, okay, shit. Are you sure? Yeah. And there we are, like in this vegan place. Okay, next day, I don't know, Hanover. No, on the way to Hanover, that's like this small village with an amazing veggie burgers. Okay, let's go.
This one's not Grüne something, it's Golden something. Yeah.
They're
all the they're all the green something or the Golden Oasis or whatever. Yeah.
Such a nice guy, man. Yeah, and a master composer, you know, like just the lines in Claudia Quintet. I listened to that band so much, you know, just like this, what you guys been doing and writing out lead sheets, and probably all wrong, but still, it's kind of helped me to understand what was going on. But
yeah, that band has been super important to me, my development, sort of. Yeah, I love those decades playing together.
Yeah. Who did inspire you to become a band leader? I mean, and when did you start leading bands in New York? Kind of leading me also to the question, how did Playball, which is kind of later, happen? But like your band leader story.
Funny, like what inspired you to become a band leader? I'm a vibraphonist, Samo. I don't know if you know, but like if you want to work, you got to kind of do your own thing for the most part. Like, you know, there aren't a lot of vibes players that sort of get by as sidemen for their entire lives. And I'm a weirdo. I have such bizarre sensibilities and abilities. Like, you know, I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I get it. So, you know, I have to figure out what I want to do and do it. So yeah, it's interesting that you talk so specifically in terms and use the phrase band leader, you know, like how do you become that? Because I've been thinking a lot about what that means to be a band leader. And you know,
in a sense, you know, like basically taking the responsibility, getting the guys together, writing the music, kind of investing your money, you know, so
there's all that practical side of it, right? And that's just what you do if you need to create work, right? Or create opportunities to collaborate with folks.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole like there are all these other sides of band leading that really interest me in terms of how you encourage people you trust and admire to like do things they might not have yet done,
Yeah.
and like how you urge people on to be great. Um, and how you create community around your group, like who comes to see you, what venues do you work with, like there's all this stuff around band leading that I have learned to appreciate. And I was gonna say I'll be the first to say that I haven't always been a good leader, but I don't think I would be the first to say it. I think there are people who've been in my bands in the past who would beat me to that, who would say, yeah, you really weren't a good band leader at the beginning. I'll own that. I get that.
Sure,
Like, it's
sure.
cool. But I've learned a lot over the years, and I feel like I'm in a good place with that, and I enjoy leading and thinking about how to help people like find access to new places in them, and trying to suss out like what'll fire that person up, but also get something new out of them, right?
Yeah.
So I really dig that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think you've achieved that.
yeah,
Like when
and
I listen to
that doesn't matter.
No, I wanted to
Say it
say
again.
I think when I listen to your trio with Gary and Tom, I think you really achieved that you're like using these players, for instance, like. But sorry, go on.
Yeah,
Didn't want to
so
interrupt you.
it's funny. You at the very beginning, you're like, I want to. You were like, what? You asked about the play ball trio. And you're like, are you guys still working? And my immediate reaction, I didn't say it at the time, was like, what do you mean still working? We've never been working. Like the whole premise of that group was like, let's just get together and play. Like literally, I was like, hey, Gary and Tom, I'd like to do this. Would you be down? Let's meet at the recording studio. And
Oh, okay.
we made that first record just like we had never
Really?
played together before.
Wow.
I had no intention of doing any gigs. Like I was just like, let's just do this. Let's see. And it was, I of course had ideas of why I wanted them and why I wanted the sound and stuff, but I also was coming from this place of like, just being like, I've never felt that as a band leader, I have done my best vibes playing. Like I always feel like the vibes playing I do that I like the most in has until recently has been in other people's bands. That there's some mental block that I'm like, I'm just too worried about the product as I'm making it when I'm in charge. And so I don't feel as free. And so, yeah, so that starting that trio was like when I started to address that for myself, like, all right, let me see. I really trust these guys. I know that anything they play will sound awesome. So even if I just lay out, it's going to be a great trio record, um, and they've just always been both inspiring and supportive dudes who understand the mental game of making music. So they were a great fit for it. And now we've got these 2 albums. We've done our first gig we ever did together. I called our farewell concert because I had very little faith that we'd ever like be in the same place at the same time and have like the funding to do a gig or whatever. And then when the second album came out, we did a record release party for that I was able to call our reunion tour. So yeah, we've already had a farewell concert and a reunion tour, and and two albums. So I don't know if we will do more or if we'll just have to see. Every time I see Tom, he's like, man, we got to do that again. So hopefully I'll make it happen someday.
What about you as a composer, as part of your band leading experience? How do you write usually? Like,
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. Ask again.
Yeah, I mean, the composing part of band leading, how do you compose usually? Like, where do your ideas come from and how do you get a piece together?
Yeah, I'm not a composer in the capital C, composer sense, like where I get up and dedicate time to writing every morning or something like that. I sort of have a fear of routinizing it in that way. My time in academic institutions made me really like resistant to the idea of using systems.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like systems were helping a lot of people produce work that was not necessarily helping people around them. So I kind of shot myself in the foot in that one, because I know that actually getting into a regular practice of writing is a good way for a composer to work. But as I said, I'm very resistant to that. So I try and use what I know about developing ideas to sort of access my inner ear.
Yeah.
So everything is a little different. Sometimes it'll be a melody I hear. Sometimes it'll be a rhythm that inspires me. Sometimes it's an idea. A lot of the stuff I wrote for the second organ trio record with Tom and Gary was based around ideas of subtle polytonality. How can you be polytonal, but not a real overt, like this on that thing, like where it's a very sort of organic thing, where like branches of a tree coming off it, and you're like, wait a minute, like I think I'm on a different branch than that person is, or something, you know, but where it's not necessarily inherently dissonant or something like that. So, and that was cool to find out that as I was bringing that stuff in to the trio, Gary was like, yeah, I've been thinking about really almost the same stuff, and so that was a cool confluence of how to approach that stuff.
I love Spring on that record, by the way. That tune, the second one, I think it's Spring. It's
Spring, yeah.
The line there, and Tom going, you know, all wild over is. I think it's such a nice one.
Right.
I don't know. Just remember.
Right. So that's
a beautiful.
Yeah, that one is almost polytonal in a way at the beginning, but it's like polyrhythmic, and like we're setting up what sounds like a quarter note, which isn't a quarter note, and then those guys are such masters at swimming in those waters. Cool. So yeah, I try and approach it different. Everything is sort of different and unique to me. To be honest, I do a lot of writing by singing into my voice notes on my phone. And then like when I have a chance at home, be like, all right, let's go back and listen to that. Let me hear it. Let me play it. Let me expand it. Let me improvise on it. Just see what comes out. And then a lot of my composition process is about taking things out, taking things away. I'll write a whole bunch and be like, okay, cool. So you did all that, but like, who cares? That's just too much. Just like get rid of most of it, you know, and just to try and find it's like almost trying to get to the Bulgarian women's choir version of it, you know, like what's the most powerful, essential, irreducible element of it, you know, that's what really interests me. And also I've been thinking a lot in terms of creating improvised American music. Maybe it's jazz, maybe it's not. I've been thinking a lot about my relationship to jazz, to the jazz tradition in that. And, you know, a lot of people of my generation who've come up who are improvisers and composers, you know, there's sort of always been this thing about like, well, let's blur the lines between composition and improvisation, right? Yep. And over the past decade or so, I've really begun to re-examine that, be like, why? Why would we want to blur those lines? And I think that there's so much that the jazz tradition, and specifically Black American music, African diasporic music, has to offer us, that is a real embrace of the improvisation, where you're not trying to cloak it in composition. You're not like, so I really started to think about the role of improvisation in pre-imagined music, kind of in that way, and to try and approach that differently, to sort of check myself like, hey, to what degree might my feelings about this be like coming from a basis of white supremacy, white privilege, Eurocentrism? Like, let's talk about this. Let's think about this. Let me see what I can strip away and start over on this stuff. So I am filled with such love and appreciation of like jazz improvisation and the history of jazz. And, you know, I really want that love and that celebrational spirit of that to like be part of the Audible Spirits thing. That's why it's called Audible Spirits. That's why spirits, like I feel like when you're playing jazz, all the ghosts are in the room with you. All the history of jazz are all there, like watching over your shoulder, being like, what are you playing, man? Like, oh, you're doing it that way, you know, like these cats played it this way, and oh, that's cool, you're changing that. Like, I love that's like the conversation that we don't get to have because we're not all in the tour van all the time anymore or something, right?
Yep.
But you know, so I try now when I'm composing to try and leave room for that energy to come out. When I'm writing for the trio, I really try to never give out a piece of music that's over 1 page long. So sometimes I fail.
Yeah.
But like I'm like, if you can't say it in a page, you know, like what are you trying to do? It's like you're trying to put puppets on strings and make people do what you want them to do, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm like, I start writing and then, you know, when you start complicating, it's bad, I think. Well, I've done that phase, you know, like 8-pagers, constantly changing meters, harmonies. But now lately I listen, I don't know, to a Paul Motion ballad and I'm like, shit, man, it's like 6 notes or a frisale or whatever. And it's like, it works, you know, it's just about one short melody that can be, or interval, like you said, you know, that can be, I don't know, changed, manipulated, and yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I was really appreciating your melodic phrasing and your phrase lengths on the Pure and Simple record.
Oh, thank you.
Really cool.
Yeah, I try to stay out of the way of those two guys. You know, we played gigs, and I'm like,
that's a good approach, man. Stay with that.
I don't know. It's like they improvise like on a couple of gigs. Like I don't know. Remember the first gig we play ahead, and I kind of step out, and you know they're playing a duo, and I'm just like there, like, oh man, this is awesome. And I think it's been going on for 4 minutes, and I'm like, I don't know. I guess I should enter somehow, but I don't want to actually. But still, you know,
right.
Bizarre.
I think of that. Whose line is that? It's not like a Zoot Sims line. I forget whose line it is, but don't just do something, sit there, you know, like the opposite.
It's true, man. It's like, I don't know, it's like I could listen to those guys, or you know, when you're with such musicians on the bandstand, I like, damn, you know, it's the master's playing. So
and you know, I'm not throwing shade on folks who play a lot of notes or write a lot of dense compositions. Some people hear that way, work that way. It's good. It's just not for me.
No, I mean I've been there, but now lately in the last few years, I'm like really, like you say, reducing also, and less is more, and I don't know. The older you get, I don't know. But Matt, not to take too much of your time, but I just wanted to ask you also, what's on the schedule still for you? Like upcoming months, do you have some new records planned with as a sideman or band leading, or what's happening?
Yeah, as I said, we're trying to start working up new Audible Spirits repertoire. That's really exciting, and I have just finished up a new Slavic Soul Party record of originals.
Ooh,
that's really intriguing to me. Some different sounds there.
Well, when is it coming out?
I don't know. Sometime, I think late spring, early summer. I haven't figured out. I'm still talking to my community of record label folks and seeing, you know, who wants to do what with it. You know, a few years back, Peter Hess and I started our own record label called Disco Knife, and that's we've been the organ trio records that I've done are on Disco Knife, as well as a trio record that I'm on of Peter's, and all sorts of different stuff. So it might actually just come out on Disco Knife. We've just been doing that to encourage that flow, that artistic flow of like create, release, move on, you know, outside of marketplace pressures. So who knows what'll happen with that. Yeah, I'm just like, I'm in a place where I'm really enjoying just practicing, but not vibraphone. I'm enjoying practicing the vibraphone too. I'm like trying to understand some of the stuff that some of the compositional techniques that Elliot Carter was using in his sort of later stuff, and trying to use that in as an improvisational language, trying to help get used to that. But I've been really obsessed with trying to learn to play the trumpet.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I practice trumpet every day if I can, and I'm doing a lot on the drum, on the tapan or davul or whatever you want to call it, zabumba. So I'm been learning Iranian or Persian music, and there's some really interesting, fascinating rhythms and music that I wasn't aware of. Parts of Iran where there are a lot of people who have come from Africa historically, so all really fascinating rhythmic mashups that I'm have a new trio I'm part of with Mernam Rastagari and Daro Beruzi, and we're developing that stuff. So yeah, just lots of different things going on, just trying to learn and stay open. I love being a beginner at things and learning new things, and just like how that helps me hear on the vibraphone. So yeah, a lot of the work I do as a vibraphonist is away from the vibraphone, basically. So I feel like I'm in a very fertile period of like planting seeds in that way, even though I'm playing the hammered dulcimer, I'm playing the trumpet, I'm working on the drum, but usually I find that it comes back on the vibes for me. The best thing I can do for my vibes technique right now is to try and practice trumpet softly. I found that there's something about like rewiring my brain for that feeling of relaxation and purity of tone and ease, like helps when I get to the vibes.
Wow.
So yeah, that's the stuff I'm working on.
Interesting, man. Wow, super. I hope you'll come to Europe soon. Also, it would be nice to hang and to hear you play. And
it would be lovely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't remember what's up on my calendar right now, but
yeah,
I have to make it happen at some point.
Definitely. Yeah. But Matt, I'll leave you. What is today? Wednesday. Yeah.
Wednesday. February 28th.
Yeah. I'll leave you a nice Wednesday afternoon in New York. So, but thanks for sharing some of these thoughts, man.
It's such a pleasure to talk to you and to be part of this wonderful thing you've created.
Thank you for taking your time.
All right, brother.
Sharing. Matt.